Welcome back to Form, a counseling podcast. Glad you have decided to choose this hour to be with us, and we hope it's a blessing to you. I am once again sitting here with my friend Rick Dooley, who is a degree in counseling psychology, over 20 years experience in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, as well as over 30 years experience in counseling, has done community-based counseling and other things, and he is walking us through these 8 principles and has been week in and week out as we look at the 8 principles for healthy relationships. Rick, thank you for joining us again.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So,
We are working through these, and audience reception. We were just talking about this before we got on here. Audience reception in both our lives have been ouch, oof. I don't know. I don't know about that. Well, that seems it's not easy to look at these, and we just want to start off right away and say we understand we're not perfect, and
mhm.
we also are looking to apply these in our own life and get these more sort of under control in our own selves so that we can have these healthy relationships. So, if you're feeling the pain as you're listening to this and going, yeah, some of those things are kind of hard, just know we understand and that we often feel like hypocrites talking about the things that we're not perfect at ourselves.
Amen to that. Because I do think that if you are applying these right, you're going to grow, but you also, it's kind of like the brighter the light, the more you see the dust on the counter. It's
Mm,
like you can see, like if you actually look through a window pane, and the brighter it is, the more little dust particles show up. They've always been there, but it's like you're more aware of it, and you can kind of clean up and do some things a little different. And again, this, I think what we were talking about is like part of the goal is improving, making things better. But one of the frustrating things can be like if you're, when we go through these 8 principles, you're probably going to find one of them that you're like, I have really grown a lot in this area, and that's still the area you need to grow the most in.
mm-hmm.
Like that can be very, very frustrating. But it doesn't mean that you haven't grown a lot, and that maybe even listening to the past 4 that we have covered, you've grown in those areas, and part of the goal is to just keep you growing, making you more aware, shining the light on those areas, so that you can get some different results. And really, honestly, prayerfully, it's for God's glory that we do change for the benefit of others. And we talked about fruit of the Spirit. So sometimes it's
Yes.
there for other people to eat so that we can impact other people. So,
Amen. Absolutely. So I think of 2 things immediately, and the first is that I probably need to go dust some blinds. Um, so that's a that's a vulnerability. And the other thing is how how Carl Jung said that which you most need is found in the place you least wish to look. And so
absolutely.
often the things that we need are the most uncomfortable. Was talking to a person this very day about the concept that we would never choose the trials that we have, and we would never choose the areas where we can, and we would never choose the things that actually conform us into the image of Christ. Yet, if we have the ultimate goal of knowing God, then we can say, as James said, it's pure joy that I go through this trial because this is my purpose to know God, and I can
Right,
do that better through this.
right,
So if
right.
one of these aggravates you, notice that. Why does it aggravate you? Why is it frustrating? Why is it hard? It's worth taking a look if it really is something that makes you go, "Whoa, didn't like that. That's kind of hard, difficult." Well, notice that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good point, and it does put us right in line with kind of moving into this next principle. So we've covered 4. This is the 5th.
Yep.
So we're
It is
moving
the
into that.
principle of unprejudiced. Unprejudiced. So I'd like to give our audience the opportunity to hear the first 4 again and just have a sweeping summary of them, and then
Right.
I would like you to define it. So let's start off with, by the way, these are making an acronym. If you haven't caught on yet, they're making the
Right.
acronym virtuous.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the acronym that if so you'll know where we are. So we're at U today. So V is veritas, which has to do with truth, honesty, and integrity. You
Correct.
jump in if you want to add something to each one of these.
Okay. No, that's great.
Um, And all of these are things we're to adopt in order to have healthy relationships. So, first, veritas, truth, honesty, integrity. Second, being imputable, the idea of being accountable, responsible,
Hmm.
being willing to take the blame, being willing to be responsible.
The benefit of that is that it actually helps you bond to other people. So
Mm,
you know, the part of that is like, part of this is, why do I do this? Why do I want to be honest? Why do I want to be imputable? That's going to strengthen that relationship, for a principle of a healthy relationship, as you were saying.
excellent. Okay. Number 3 is rational. We went over this as well. Governed by reason and logic, objective and factual rather than bias.
Right. And we said Joe Friday says, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts, so that we can get an objective perspective on what the issues really are, kind of move out of our emotions so that we can remain more in control of our emotions, be less volatile, but also be grounded in what the issues really are instead of moving us off our square, so to speak. We can remain focused on what the issue is.
Love it. Fourthly is temperate, modest, self restrained, not self exalted. This is in line with humility or being right sized and
Right.
having the right perception of self.
Correct. And we were saying that is often, we fall in one of two sides usually, when that is, we either think the world revolves around us or that we have no impact on the world. And so it's trying to find the right size in which, how do I show up in a relationship, and having that proper perspective. And when we feel less than or bigger than, we really want to evaluate ourselves, in relationship to who God is, not who we are. And so that helps us it'll either humble us, or it will, encourage us to be a little bolder, because God can do some amazing things through each of us if we show up.
Excellent. And now we arrive at the 5th of the 8 principles, which is entitled Unprejudiced. Unprejudiced.
Right.
And so we want to open with a definition of this, because this is a word that can immediately be associated with some more, politically focused things.
Mhm.
How, Rick, if you'll define it and then answer this question, how is unprejudiced one of the principles useful in having healthy relationships?
So being unprejudiced is having to do with being free from bias, in which we show up often with we think we have the answers, we think we already have things figured out. And so what we're trying to do is position ourselves to be more open-minded and receptive to what somebody else's perception might be, what their experience might have been. If they're giving you feedback, you're able to incorporate the other principles that we've gone over, because it allows you to position yourself to be more open-minded. And so that you've been struggling with this sometimes whenever you recognize that you get very defensive. You're quick to become defensive if somebody points something out. You might be argumentative, find yourself in a lot of, disagreements over minor things. And it's difficult to allow somebody else's opinion or perception or input to be there. Maybe we're reluctant to see our past experiences from a new perspective. So positioning yourself to see things differently. Like if you have sat through these others that we've already covered, you're making some progress with open-mindedness, or, because you're allowing yourself to experience the little bit of uncomfortableness. Maybe, like we had said before, you disagree with some of this, but you're still listening. And, we had talked about this before, was, how open do we want to be? And, we want to be positioning ourselves to be unprejudiced, to check ourselves, but how open do we become?
Yeah,
And
that was my, because we always hear that. I say we always. I have regularly heard that
right,
concept of you don't want to be so open minded your brains fall out. Ha ha
right,
ha. But
right,
the concept is there's a degree of open mindedness that is dangerous.
right.
So you're bringing up something that I was going into right away, which is when you're talking about being free from bias, free from um, and I'm assuming this includes assumptions,
Correct. That's
free
very
from
good.
bias,
Good
free from
point.
assumptions,
Right.
walking into a relationship where you're not immediately dismissing someone based upon the clues that you think you see,
Hmm.
or immediately embracing someone based upon the clues you want to see, genuinely trying to not assume, genuinely trying not to create a bias, but being open-minded in the relationship.
Hmm.
So you're going to have to help steer
Sure.
us with some parameters here, because if it's of course not unwise, I'll put it all in the negative, it's not unwise to use your past experiences and use some context clues in order to make smart judgments before you're like walking up to a stranger, for instance, right? And
Yeah.
in a long term relationship, you even feel like you have maybe more confidence in what you know, air quotes here, know
Mhm.
about the person. So if this is a principle of a healthy relationship, help me work that out a little bit in front of everybody. What is this referring to that separates good judgment from assumptions and bias? And what does it look like to be open minded in a healthy way?
So I think I really think within the prison context, from my experience, people are very good at trying to size other people up
Mm,
because your life could depend on it. And so people often come into a situation, they're like, that person exhibits certain characteristics that put me on guard. I've been hurt by people like that in the past. I've been taught certain things about different people. So we come into these things with a prejudgment or a bias, and it has possibly served you well to protect yourself. So, and as you said, we're not trying to discount wisdom and discernment on what's dangerous or not. So, you do want to kind of check yourself a little bit and see if you're overly judgmental on who can help you, who is a threat and who is not. And I think we tend to dismiss some people very quickly that may be of benefit to us if we would listen to a different perspective. And and I'm saying that can be somebody you disagree with. But if you think about cultural differences, and I'm really not referring so much to cultural differences, but as an example, somebody that comes from a rural background or an urban background, maybe they're just talking about different types of food, and it's like, well, I've never tried that before, and it's like, well, that sounds gross, and then you try it, and you're like, man, that is really good. It's like, so
yeah.
you're trying it, and then your perceptions sort of broaden, your tastes broaden, and you've done nothing wrong. You haven't sacrificed your values. You haven't stood on biblical principles that have been. I mean, you've stood on biblical principles. You haven't sacrificed any of that. So we're
Yep.
not
Yep.
talking about that type of threat, because there are certain things that we've said before, which, if we're talking about the Ten Commandments, I'm not willing to bend on those. God's put those out for our guidance and our benefit. So we're not talking about things like that, but we are talking about maybe somebody comes from a different perception and offers us some feedback on something. And when we would have normally tended to dismiss somebody like that, we recognize they're a child of God as well. Let me listen to them, and I can tolerate just hearing them out. And I know that that sounds maybe minimal for many people in our audience, that you can listen to anybody. But some people really struggle with that. And when we're talking about that open-mindedness, it's about being receptive to a different perception of something that maybe I've been missing. Like somebody else holds a clue to my benefit. And so we're looking to those things that can expand our experience, our knowledge, our self growth.
Not to oversimplify what you just said, but this sounds like a learner mentality.
A learner mentality.
A
What do you mean?
learner mentality. I'm going to go into this relationship. I'm going to view this as an opportunity that if I would listen to you, maybe I would learn something I didn't already know,
Correct.
or confirm something that I maybe know but aren't sure about, right? And
Right.
so this idea that I'm not complete. I'm not done the way I am.
Right.
And so I'm listening to those that are in my life with an ear toward maybe they have something to offer I've never seen before.
That's very good, because if you're another part of like kind of suffering with this is if you think you don't need anybody else to solve your problems, so to speak. You have a complex problem and you have experts around, but you're not going to listen to any of them. And there's a lot of reasons why we don't. And so kind of taking a step back and figure out, where did you come up with some of the experiences, the observations, the biases? Where did those come from? And they usually come from our home environment. They come from our cultural background. They do come from just life experiences that could have been very negative, and then that shapes our perception around certain people, certain groups. And again, there's some wisdom to draw from that, uh, because you don't want to put yourself in stupid situations, right?
Hmm.
But you do want to be involved with other people that are not exactly like you.
So, okay, with what you just said, it sounds like that a practical first step to how to have the right amount of open mindedness might be listening. So, for someone that's listening to this right now and they go, I want to be open minded, but I don't want to lose my principles. I don't want to allow something into my relationship that's unhealthy. I don't trust my own discernment, or I'm worried that I won't be the discerning, and I'll be open minded, and then I'll accept too much, and it'll become actually a problem for me, or it'll become sinful.
Right.
The first step would be like, you don't have to dismiss anything if you'll just learn to listen. Like, that's a good first step, or no?
Absolutely. Like, you listen, and you can actually filter. And that's where we start talking about boundaries. Is sometimes we're afraid that if I listen to somebody, they're going to, you know, take me into their cult, so to speak. And it's like, well, again, we're really encouraging Christian principles and Christian values, and grounding yourself and rooting yourself in those. And if God has said something, then take that to the bank. And then our ability to interact with other people that are different than us is actually kind of what we're called to do, if you think about it. Seek and save the lost. Well, if they're not coming into the church, what does that mean for us? That means we go out and we're not just in our little safe space. And I do see people that they don't want to venture out from the church group. It's very safe there. And that's fine that you feel safe there. You should feel safe there. But we're also called to engage and seek and save. So we're trying to, not lose our groundedness, but we are looking to try to invite other people into our what we are secure in, but we're also going to engage in those relationships, and those relationships can grow, and we can actually blossom from that.
Hmm.
Um,
So there was an idea for a long time, especially among conservatives, that if you were to listen or hear out a person that disagreed with you or that may have been wrong, or but we didn't know that until we would listen. So just start with, if
mhm.
you heard a person that disagreed with you, that there was a danger in that. There was a danger in listening. There was a danger in hearing ideas that weren't correct. There's a danger in um, letting someone sort of speak their piece, if you will. And so I think, and I'm not trying to throw a blanket across a whole group of people here, because it goes beyond conservatism. It goes beyond homeschoolers. It goes beyond, whatever political party. It doesn't. It goes beyond that. I think we as humans are often more afraid of new ideas than we like to admit.
Mhm.
And we like you said, it for a lot of people listening, and for others, that we'll talk to, there's going to be this idea that if I listen to something that I disagree with, or if I hear someone out that I've already made assumptions about and have kind of a bias toward because of the way they look, because of something they said, because of the way they act, if I actually hear them out, that I'm bad, or they're going to suck me into their cult, as you said. I'm not
Oh, I thought
making
you were.
sense.
Yeah, you are. You're making a lot of sense. The benefit of this is not to scare you away from new experiences, is to encourage you to be grounded in what you do know and yet be open to new perceptions. Because if you're, again, you've been listening to this, maybe you want to do some things different in your life. We've said do something different, get something different. You've got to be open to a new approach. And again, where I'm coming from is the world of recovery, so to speak, and recognizing that some of my very best thinking got me in the worst situations that I've been in. And so
Mm,
there's a sense of openness when you go to church. I'm going to listen to a new perception about what does God say. And I'm saying these people are completely different than me. They're, I've been out in the bars, I've been on the streets, I've been, committing crimes, I've been doing all this other stuff. And then I come into these do-gooders, these church people, and they're boring. They're boring. They're whatever. But it's like it's not about, there's a sense of groundedness that you automatically attribute something negative to a church group. People come in with biases towards church all the time, and you're hoping that they're going to be open-minded. I'm asking you to look at the flip side of that and recognize in your life, where are you closed-minded? Where do you close that gate on people that could be maybe welcomed into the church, that are really different than yourself, and that they might offer a sense, a depth of life? Because I do see much of the Christian life is just trying to remain innocent and pure, and those are all they're noble things, but they're also sometimes they kind of close the gate, so to speak, on new people coming into the church, new people within your support system.
yeah. Easy to do. Easy to do. Um, Not right. That's what I'm saying, but easy to do. So this leads us right into this next kind of section, which is, where do we see bias? So the reason that I'm asking that question is because it seems like in our world that bias has been the cause of a tremendous amount of mistrust. We see bias in the news media, and it causes us to mistrust what they're saying, and rationally so, rightfully so.
Hmm.
When you've been lied
Absolutely.
to or betrayed or told false information, it's right to then mistrust that source of information is going to then continue to tell you truth ongoing. Um, we could argue or talk about, the pharmaceutical companies and the idea of big pharma and doctors. I just feel like our culture is in a state of a grave and serious mistrust, and a lot of that, it seems, has stemmed from this idea of bias. Right, there was an agenda. Maybe it was secret, maybe it was overt, but it was a bias. So where do you see bias in culture, but also just particularly zoning into relationships in how it harms?
So I see where we often will be scared to listen to somebody else's perception about ourselves. And it's like you're saying, the safety part is, we want to be protective of ourselves, like we don't want to be stupid, but we also kind of anchor ourselves with, is God really in charge of us? Are we recognizing that God brings some people into our lives in which we are to recognize that we're going to grow out of these relationships with people that are different than us? And what I find is people move towards, they're very comfortable with certain groups, they're very comfortable, but what have you heard about your comfort zone? The comfort zone will kill you, so to speak. And so just staying in that comfort zone also makes us kind of stale, makes us unchallenged, and we don't grow very much. We're made to kind of wrestle with some things. And so I think it's just automatically almost being overconfident. When we were talking about that humility, is we think we have all the answers, when in reality, let's listen to some other folks that are, I am asking you to look at what are their value sets? Like, where are they coming from? And so it is understanding that some people do have a different agenda, and you can tell that. I think a lot of times you can tell when, especially now, we're much more wise on when it comes to media influence, and that there is so much bias there. And then we listen to it and we go, but that doesn't sound right. And that's okay. That's actually good. Have confidence. That doesn't sound right. But it's not just because I'm basing it off of what I've always known. It's because of not just what I've always known, but it's kind of like just what I've experienced. Maybe I've got some bias coming in of my own, and we're trying to get to truth. Like that's the primary goal. And so when we looked at before, when we were talking about being rational,
Yeah.
when that's looking at the facts, and hopefully if I can extend some openness to what other people are telling me, I can get a better look at myself. So we have a tendency to discount people that tell us things we don't like to hear. And ultimately, that's kind of where I'm going with this, is when people come in to counseling and it was, say that they had been picked up for their third DUI. They're driving under the influence. It's the third time. And they're just like, the police just have it out for me. And it's like, if I didn't have a broken tail light, they never would have pulled me over and I would have never gotten a DUI. And they're not recognizing that maybe they struggle with alcohol. Maybe the problem isn't the tail light. The problem is actually that I have an alcohol issue. And your loved ones around you have been telling you things such as, you should stop drinking. And they're saying it's not the problem. My drinking's not the problem. It's the police. It's the people that are against me. And so I'm kind of transitioning more into that. I'm painting the picture prior to this as we come into so many relationships. Where did we get our perceptions from, our biases, and how do we stay open? Because maybe somebody's trying to tell you something and you don't want to listen. And if you don't listen, what's that going to cost you?
So that brings it home a lot more into our interpersonal relationships rather than people in general, because a lot of the people that we know, that we're intimate with, maybe it's a marriage, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's mom or dad, those people know us. And so trying to trying to adapt an open-mindedness in relationships that you've already been in for many, many years, that seems to be a place of interest for me, right? Because that's often what I am looking at in the counseling room, right? How do I help a person who comes in who's looking at me to help them with interpersonal relationships, someone that they've known for years and years and years, who thinks they've got them under their thumb, who thinks that they know them better than anybody? How can they then adopt an open-mindedness? And it often, and you just said it, it sounds like it often is in the place where they're saying the thing you don't want to hear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So people
That's a good place to start, at least.
Well, I think that's kind of the part of this point is sometimes the people we don't like will tell us the truth because they don't care.
Right.
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 And am I open to that feedback, or do I just automatically shut them down? I'm like, that I don't like that person. They don't like me. I'm not listening to anything they say. And actually what they said was true. So,
yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. Like there are groups of people. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm advocating for you to go join any kind of group that is polar opposite to you. What I am saying is listen to some of the criticism. Mm-hmm. Criticism can be very valuable, but filter it, be open to it, analyze it, don't be afraid of it. And if it's not true, then you can dismiss it. I have a saying in treatment that's not mine, but it's just very, very, very valuable in the recovery community. And it is take what you can and leave the rest behind.
Yeah.
Everything that somebody says, I don't care if you love me to death, everything I say is not going to be correct. But can you take some of the things that we've been talking about and utilize them for your benefit? And as we were talking before, We say ouch. Why do we say ouch? Well, let's be open to that. You said that, like kind of take a look
Yeah.
back. When your loved ones
So
point things out to you. Go ahead.
what I'm hearing you say is that often the bias that we need to overcome is actually about ourselves. That we think we've already figured it out and we're not open to hearing something different than the story we've created in our own minds about ourselves.
So, talking about the narrative, right?
Yeah.
So, maybe you can expand on that a little bit on the narrative.
Well, it's just that the narrative, for these purposes, just to be quick, the narrative is the idea that we all have a running story, and that the more cohesive that story, that narrative is in our life, seemingly the better we're able to accept things we don't like and to improve in areas that we are struggling and to endure things that we go through, because a cohesive narrative is an ability to accept things as they really are as you go. And so if you're stuck in a place where you're in your bias toward someone else in a relationship, it's most likely that you're unaccepting of their perception of your narrative. That they're seeing something about your story, they're seeing something about your life that doesn't fit with what you've already decided. And that actually represents a problem.
So, that often is because it's threatening to a framework that we have held. And so, it's the stronger your framework, the stronger your accurate perception of yourself. You do see the benefits of people that are quite successful welcome constructive criticism. They're actually welcoming it, and what happens is you often see this is in people in positions of power. Nobody around them feels like they can tell them the truth, and they're they don't get an accurate perception, and maybe that's because they're powerful and they control the maybe they control somebody's job, and they don't want to be open to feedback of what somebody else is observing. And so people with more successful leadership skills are receptive to feedback. They welcome it because they're trying to grow from it. They're trying to turn things into something better instead of status quo.
Back to
So
that learner's mentality.
exactly, exactly. So it's that everybody around me doesn't have to threaten me. And so that again goes back into your hopefully your Christian framework, your mindset of who is Christ, who does he tell me to be, how am I anchored into those type of things, and then I can filter out feedback. I can, examine myself according to the scriptures. It doesn't say like be closed minded. We can listen to other people's perceptions, and we can still at the conclusion of what they have said go, you are completely wrong. Like it is illogical. It is not going to turn out well for that other person, but you have done something to withstand the criticism. You extended grace, respect to somebody else to listen to them, and that's a personal growth aspect, not somebody that just gets mad, upset and rejects everything and everybody around them. So, and
Okay, so as we are moving through these, I want to take this time to remind people again that this is not a buffet where you belly up and take one or another, but that these are these all of these eight
mhm,
principles are taken together as a whole. And so there's an aspect of this that involves humility, and humility is something we talked
absolutely.
about um, in the idea of being temperate last time. And so, this idea of unprejudiced, open minded, free from bias, receptive to feedback, these ideas also have a lot to do with humility. In Philippians 2, we're told to consider one another more important than ourselves. This idea of an others mentality. And, if our life is defined by Christ, then what we're looking to do in the lives of other people are what's best for them. And you really can't get a vision of what's best for someone else and consider them, as Philippians tells us, you can't really consider them more important if you go into or maintain in a relationship a bias and an inability to receive any feedback.
So I think that that's a good perception there, because you can sometimes clearly see where people are in the wrong. And
So I don't know who said this, but I, I've heard it said, and I agree that, and as we're talking about being receptive to feedback, there's really no such thing as constructive criticism. It's just criticism and teaching,
mhm,
right? And that's a reframing of that, because what we call constructive criticism is criticism that we've received that we've used constructively.
right,
Um, Now, you could argue, well, there's a intent behind the person giving it that could be considered constructive. So you say constructive criticism is when the person talking intends for their criticism to be something helpful, and that may be. But if I am telling you something that you're doing wrong or in some way you need to improve, that's also called teaching, right?
right,
Or the Bible uses the word rebuke. Here I'm pointing out something that you need to stop doing, and I'm pointing to a way that you need to do it differently. So this idea of constructive criticism is often abused. A lot of people will take that and use their opinion, use the title of constructive criticism to try to unfairly criticize people or air their opinion or be hateful or say something that they want to get off their chest that's really unregulated and emotionally reactive. And so that term in constructive criticism is often associated with that. If you're the person receiving this, you have a couple options. The one is to hear it as criticism, get down about it, be upset, and be closed minded and be unreceptive to that feedback. Or you have the option to be open to that feedback, investigate why the person might be giving you that criticism. And if you do that, then that's actually learning. That's not just being a victim of this criticism or a victim of negativity. That's actually hearing and learning. So, I'm not trying to pick on the terminology necessarily, but I do think that if we take constructive criticism and we reframe it, it's just teaching. It's just I'm seeking to learn. And the person receiving it has the power over that even more than the person giving it.
I think that's well said. And I think about this in the context of Christian relationships. And we talk about accountability groups sometimes. And we say that we want that accountability, but yet we can feel that resistance when people hold us accountable. And so it's like you're looking at this and saying, is what they are saying true and for my benefit? And sometimes that's a no. And that's I'm trying to really instill that strength there, is sometimes there's a no there, but sometimes there is something that we really do need to hear. I don't know what kind of, we're all in some kind of sin. And generally somebody calling that out is we become very defensive. We could become argumentative and we don't want to talk about it. Versus why did they take the time to address it with me? Maybe because they care. Maybe they don't care, but it's true. And so whether they care or they don't care is almost irrelevant to what you need to learn. And so it's back to exactly what you were saying, is with that criticism, what is a value for me to take and learn from?
And that would be open-minded. That would be an example of being open-minded.
That's and so the concept of being unprejudiced is I'm open-minded. I can take my biases, set them aside. Everything that I think about why you're doing what you're doing, maybe I can listen to this from the framework of, is this this good for me? Is this something that I might consider? Or on the other hand, no, I don't consider this. This is somebody coming from a bad place. Their perceptions are wrong. They don't know. So like I said, take what you can, leave the rest behind.
The biggest place that I see this idea of being receptive to feedback, or the need to be receptive to feedback in order to really see fruit in a relationship, is in marriage. So many couples get to a spot in their relationship where they can't hear each other anymore. They don't want to hear each other anymore. They're not open or receptive to feedback. And um, just to make a comment, and you tell me what you think about this, one of the things that I work with couples on a lot is the concept that you didn't get there to that place where you cannot hear the other one overnight. That's a pattern that's developed over time. And the pattern that develops over time is one of mistrust, which is why you can't hear the feedback they're giving you, and that you're not positioned for feedback from them because you don't trust them. You don't believe that they have your best interest at heart for some reason. Yeah, you're married, you might have kids together, you've been together for a long time, but you've treated each other in such an inconsistent way, perhaps through sarcasm or passive aggressive speech, perhaps through the way that you have talked about each other outside of your marriage to other people, perhaps in the way you've criticized one another and never encouraged. All these things could be potential reasons that you end up in a place where I'm no longer listening to you, or I don't want to listen to you give me feedback on me, because I truly, at the heart of things, don't believe that you actually want what's best for me, or that you're really seeking my good. Um, the assumption is you're really trying to fix me so that you get something out of it, or you're really trying to change me so that your life's easier. And your unwillingness to admit your own mistake, your unwillingness to say, I know where I am insufficient, I know where my sin is, I know where my weaknesses are. Your inability to do that actually stumps your ability to speak into someone else's life. Being able to be the first one to say, hey, me, I realize my part in this, gives you a little bit of equity to use in giving feedback to somebody else. We still have to be careful because some people aren't asking for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we're saying is that this unprejudiced attitude that we want to adopt in a healthy relationship is one that actually shows up and says, I'm going to adopt this even if nobody else does. I'm going to adopt this even if my husband doesn't, even if my wife doesn't. I'm going to do this because I want to be receptive to feedback so that I can hear what's being said. But on the other side, I just want to put out there that the possibility is that you don't want that feedback, or that your spouse is not receiving that feedback because you're really not, you don't have a pattern of trustworthiness. Yeah, you may not have cheated. Yes, you may have been faithful physically and in those ways. But if you're not consistent in the way you treat them, and there's no evidence in little micro ways leading up to that moment of feedback that you are trustworthy and truly want the best for them, then there's not going to be an openness to feedback there. That's a lack of trust, which is why I think this open to feedback actually relates back directly to trust. Speak to that for a minute, if you can take all that mess and say something.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and it again kind of goes back to a little bit of that. Your prior behaviors, your past thinking probably led you to this conflict. And when you're talking about in the marriage, we're generally become open when we are almost broken. We're into a crisis, and then we're looking around for somebody to give us feedback, somebody to give us help. And this is actually a vulnerable time for people. And some people will welcome the feedback, and other people will stay closed off and kind of dig themselves even in a greater hole. So, but the people that are around them have, like you're saying, they've known them for a long time. They've seen these things, and it's hard to hear those same people because of that erosion of trust. And you're looking so much at them and saying, but if they would change, if they would listen to me, and can we just switch seats, so to speak, and say, well, what if I would just listen to them? Maybe I can hear them a different perspective. And that's where the benefit, though, of coming into counseling is getting an alternate perception. But how many people do you see come into counseling and they just want you to affirm their position? They don't really want to get help. And so you're defeating the purpose of going to counseling if you're going to stay closed to the feedback versus coming in unbiased and saying, hey, I'm open to somebody else's perception. I'm going to challenge my prejudices on what I have thought walking into this, and try to be receptive to something else. And again, we're usually more open when we're in a vulnerable position of pain. Our marriage is on the rocks, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. We're more open, I think, in the counseling room, but I've also seen where when you're put in a vulnerable position, or when you feel backed up against the corner, or when you feel like the stakes are high, there's a shutting down as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's it's like I've come to the end of the line and my spouse won't change, so I'm just done. And if you're listening and that's you, then hear the clear message that adopting these things in yourself is the step that we're saying to take to open up that other person. Because it is amazing how when you are walking in these things, doing these things, adopting these attitudes, these principles for healthy relationships, adopting them in yourself actually causes people to respond differently to you.
So that's an excellent point. And when we're talking about the listening, when you're starting with listening, there's also active listening. When you're not going ahead.
Specifically referring to, yes, please talk about this topic.
So
elaborate.
So when you're talking about the active listening, you're listening to what the other person is saying without trying to go ahead and formulate your response. It's very difficult to exhale and inhale at the same time. So if you're going to exhale, you're not going to inhale. So if somebody's offering you some information, are you too busy thinking up your witty response versus listening to what they are saying? You can reflect back what they said and ask if that was accurate. So a summary of what somebody was saying is, even if you get it wrong, but you're sincerely trying to understand what that person is trying to say to you, that's often received pretty well, because most people are appreciative that you're taking the time to understand what you're saying, even if you disagree with them. So basically, if you're telling me, you drove over to the house and, you ran into something on the way there, and you're listening to them and you're trying to reflect, so you ran into something and you're trying to understand how they felt, what was their experience like. That goes a long way when you're really trying to understand somebody. It doesn't mean that you agree with them. It doesn't mean that what they're saying to you is necessarily correct, but it does mean that you're taking the time to care about what they're saying, and then that invites them to listen to you.
And this is where we're going to stop right now, because this is heading directly into the next principle of obliging, and probably the next one into understanding as well. So I think it's probably a good time to put a cap on this and just say this is unprejudiced. So we've discussed it, we've thought about some aspects to it. This goes right into the next one and flows right from the last one, temperate. And this is why these go together so well, and why they're so necessary to see as a whole. So, any last thoughts before we close?
Yeah, I would like to emphasize that I know we talked about a lot of the cultural things, and those were just for framework to understand how we interact as Christians sometimes, and we hear some of those common arguments. I just want to leave people with being respectful to somebody else and what they're saying does not mean you have to agree with them. It means trying to understand where somebody else is coming from, and that respect will go a long ways in building a depth to a relationship that you desire and they may need, and you may be doing something more powerful than you recognize when you are helping somebody feel valued and that is somewhat what we're called to do because we're all children of God, and they can be wrong, and you're trying to help them into the right. And so, kind of leave you with that thought.
Very, very helpful. Thank you again, and join us next time on Former Counseling Ministry podcast. We will be dealing with the next of the 8 principles, principle number 6. And I look forward to seeing you then. Like, share with your friends, comment, subscribe. It helps us to continue to put this out. So if you're listening to this, please do us a favor and do those things. And thank you for joining us. We will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Take care.